Hi, and welcome back to the Mission Minded Podcast. I'm Jim.
And I'm Mitch. It's good to be back, Jim.
It's a great day. We just wrapped up a really good interview with Emily.
We did.
Powerful story.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the author?
Yeah, well, I have a little excerpt here about her. Emily Foreman is a long-time ministry worker whose passion is to see the captives set free. She had the desire as a child and still does today, even after the death of her husband at the hands of Al-Qaeda extremists. Compelled by God's love for Muslims and inspired by her late husband's willing sacrifice, she and her family continue to work in North Africa and strive to mobilize Christians across North America to see the Muslim world through the lens of faith.
As you could imagine by that description, it's a powerful story. And she's actually written a book. I just want to make sure I get it right. We Died Before We Came Here. So highly recommend the book. I'm not all the way through it, but I've really enjoyed it so far. So if you enjoy this podcast, I recommend looking into that. We'll make sure and put a link in the show notes below. So what's a big takeaway maybe for you, Mitch? Just talking to somebody who's been through some difficult times, and I think just really trying to use those times for God's glory. But maybe what was a big takeaway for you today?
Yeah, I guess hearing her powerful testimony, the testimony of her family, I was just, kind of super encouraged by the faithful steps that they took despite the risks, because they knew that God was behind the work that they were doing. And just the sacrifice, I guess, that they made to be in North Africa ministering to Muslims and seeing a lot of fruit from that too. Again, just super encouraged by their faith and the steps that they took despite the risks.
Absolutely. And the continued work of it, and trying to minister to people who have been through difficult situations. As Steve Saint often says, people with wounds want to hear from people with scars. And she's certainly one that can speak into a unique situation for people who have been through loss. And so I encourage, again, those who have interest in this story to go get the book. And without further ado, let's jump into the podcast.
Welcome to Mission Minded, the podcast where we explore outside-the-box thinking in carrying out Christ's Great Commission. On this week's episode, we are joined by Emily Foreman, the author of We Died Before We Came Here. Our sponsor for today's podcast is Dignity Roasters Coffee. Locally roasted and packaged by the distressed to fuel each day. Dignity Roasters was born through a passion to partner with the distressed and the desire of bringing the universally loved beverage of coffee to your hands. To order your own coffee or to learn more about Dignity Roasters, visit their website at dignityroasters.com. Now here's our host, Jim Tingler and Mitch Deans.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's so wonderful to be with you. Thank you for this honor.
Would you mind, for the audience out there, just introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Emily Foreman, and I grew up in Southeast USA and very much a normal kid in rural America, and the Lord just decided to offer me a life alternative to what I personally and selfishly wanted. And long story short, I married an amazing man, Stephen, who also decided that was better than what he wanted. And so we were married, 4 children later, moved to North Africa, to a Muslim country, very, very Muslim, very restricted. And what led us there was just simply the Lord called us to unreached people. We were very aware by then of the unreached people, the 1040 window, and we were very aware that all the easy places were taken. So the Lord just sent us there, and now here I am.
That's great. How did that door actually open for you? I heard that you went on a short trip to North Africa. And you were sitting in an airport, is that correct? And the Lord spoke to both of you about kind of a future in missions in North Africa. Can you explain a bit more about that door opening?
Sure, absolutely. So when Stephen and I were dating, obviously the Lord had already worked on his heart, and had given him a burden to reach the unreached at any cost. So ironically, he gave me a book to read before we became two-ship called Foxe's Book of Martyrs. And reading that book obviously rocked my world and really made me assess how serious and committed I was to the Lord and seeing the gospel reach the ends of the earth. And so, yeah, read that. We were married. Then we were looking into sending organizations that could help equip us, but also give us access into those difficult to reach places. And we landed on Youth with a Mission. We looked into many different sending organizations, but that seemed to be the most practical, I think, because we had 3 children when we moved to Texas to actually train and be equipped. And during that lecture phase of that equipping, that school called Discipleship Training School, there is about 5 or 6 weeks of outreach phase where we actually go and practice what we're learning. Classroom, and gave us 7 different options to choose from. I had never been anywhere besides Mexico and Canada. So for me, this was a huge deal. So of course, my natural tendency is to worry, not only for my own safety, but now I have 3 little kids, 5 and under, who I have to consider as well that are going to go on this outreach with us. And they gave us the choices, said, pray. We're trusting the Lord to pan this out so that all the students, it just works out. The right amount of people are going to the right locations. And as I'm praying and learning how to hear the voice of the Lord, I hear this country in North Africa. And Stephen, we decided to pray separately because we trusted the Lord enough to speak to both of us. And he spoke that same country, even though it made no sense to us at all. We have 3 little kids. This country's in the desert. It's very, hot and challenging. And anyway, it was clear that the Lord was sending us there. So we said, okay, let's go. So we went there on our outreach phase with several other students, and I would not be honest if I didn't say that it was an extremely challenging and difficult trip for me. I mean, I was struggling with culture shock and just having experienced and being thrown headlong into a third culture, like where there's poverty and very little amenities. I mean, it was difficult to say the least. And then I had on top of that as a mother worrying for my children. So the Lord really had to work on me during that trip. And he did. I surrendered before I thought, I said, okay, Lord, take me wherever you want to take me. I'm willing. Send me. It's all words, until he actually does it and takes you to that location. So here we are in North Africa. It's 110 degrees and I have 4 little children and my youngest is struggling with heat rash. And, we're all struggling with just different, parasites or whatever. And it is not at all this romantic idea of missions that I thought I was going to experience. And then I'm questioning the Lord, Lord, Australia was one of those options. Accidentally send us to this country. I think we were supposed to go to Australia. But the Lord is sovereign, and we were able to make it through that 5.5 weeks there. And we're sitting at this airport, and the airport in this country at that moment, it's changed now, but at that moment, it's a 1 terminal little place where there's plastic chairs. There's no runway. There's no breezeway or anything that you board a plane. It's not air conditioned, and we're tired. I'm so tired and I'm hungry, and I just need some rest. I need air conditioning and a good, milkshake from some really good, restaurant. And I'm longing for all these material things, and I start feeling this is what I really feel I'm lacking. What have I really given up? Is this really all that important? And so I'm struggling with this conviction. And then the Lord speaks so clearly to me. He asks, if I call you here long term, will you come? And I just start making excuses. Lord, I grew up in this certain little backwoods church where we, hearing the voice of the Lord is a foreign concept. I just don't feel like I'm really hearing you clearly. But he asks again, if I call you back here, are you really surrendered enough to come back here long term? And then I started having this time with the Lord in the most uncomfortable place there. And I finally said, okay, yes, I will come back. Of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, but it was really just a test, right? You're not really going to send me back to this country. And yeah, sure enough, he did. 2 years later, that's exactly where the Lord sent us. And I have to say, fast forwarding to the end of the story, there's really no regrets. And that country really was just exactly what the Lord had for us. So
yeah. I actually was born in Australia, grew up in Australia, and had a culture shock moving to the States. So I can't imagine what it would be like moving to North Africa with your a young family. What was it like initially when you did decide to go full time and move over there? Was it as difficult a time as that short-term trip, or did you find it easier to adjust when you moved there full time?
It's interesting because we weigh decisions based, especially I think, on experience. Mm-hmm. And because my experience was not very positive, and to be honest, my husband, Stephen, also he struggled. He admitted it, but he also just felt that same conviction at the same time at the airport that night. And so clearly the Lord was leading, because we would have never chosen this country if it were just based on our own preference. But the Lord knew what he was doing. And so here we go. So yes, I would say it was challenging, but on a different level. So meaning that, we expected to go in, it would be that same discomfort as we experienced in our outreach. It was a little different because we were going in just shortly after 9/11. And before 9/11, many Americans just thought of Muslims as, they're those people in National Geographic that put halis on their heads. And they're just people who are very conservative and have a foreign, like a strange religion. And they live in the desert, or they're nomads or whatever. We had these sort of preconceived ideas of who these people were. But after 9/11, that entirely changed our perspective and our understanding of who Muslims are. And naturally, as we all know, especially those of us who were here and very aware of this whole situation, there were the majority, I think, especially of evangelical Christians, were looking at these people as horrible people. They're terrorists. All they want to do is, well, isn't it about jihad? Aren't they all about killing Christians and killing the infidel? And it's amazing how media, or even just a small experience, can shape our perspective and our opinion of people in general. We see that today with, these racism and just different things. It can be very unconscious, these opinions and these feelings towards people of different races or different ethnicities. And so, yeah, I think it was challenging for us in that, had just happened, and we're thinking, oh my goodness, we're not just going to a Muslim country that needs the gospel. We're going to a Muslim country that is supposedly violently opposed to the gospel, meaning that, if we go in as white Americans, they're going to target us because that's what they're supposed to do in Jihad. Isn't that what happened on 9/11? So we had, obviously our parents, the grandparents of my 4 children by now. And my youngest was just a newborn. And now everybody's wondering and questioning, are you serious? Or is this really wise? Are you crazy? These are the words that replace those initial words of, you're so courageous to do this for the Lord. We're so supportive. We'll pray for you. Then it's like, I don't know. If you're going to those people, I don't think we're going to go. Mm-hmm. We're not going to support you in that. Not everybody did that, but there were the minority of people who were initially supportive that just withdrew their support because of that perspective that they gained at that time. So we were really challenged to just question and reassess God's calling on our lives. I mean, had God changed after 9/11? Well, naturally, no. So had the need for the gospel to reach this country changed? No, it actually intensified. And so God really convicted our hearts, each of us, but also us as a couple, to lean in on the Lord and say, okay, this seems so unnatural, this practical, and very dangerous and counterintuitive, for us to go here and take our children here. But we trust you because we know that you died for these people too. And so we're just, and we had to lean in like that every day. I don't want to make it sound like it was just this one day decision and we were able to say, okay, here we are. And it was done. It was literally oftentimes a daily battle. I think that's what Paul talks about when he talks about dying daily. We're dying to ourselves and to our own comfort, I think, most of the time. Yeah, we arrived there expecting to find people who were very harsh and rigid, of a different religion, that didn't really want to hear what we had to say, and who really wanted to just take our lives because we're Christians and they're Muslims. What we found, though, was really interesting. When we arrived and we found a home to live in and we moved in, what we found was totally opposite. We found these people just running over each other to get to our door first, to invite us over for tea or for dinner. And our perspective is, here we are, we want to go in and we want to show these people we're not warmongers. We're not trying to eliminate Muslims. Obviously we want to show them that Islam is not the way, the truth, and the life. But we're not here to obliterate Muslims or terrorists. We want to show them the love of Jesus. That was our goal. When we arrived, what we found was this goal of theirs, and this intention of theirs was really to show us they were not terrorists. They never condoned this act of 9/11. They were heartbroken. We saw people in tears when they said, we're so sorry that happened to you. And so it was interesting. They were trying to prove something to us. We were trying to prove something to them, and which is, we're all humans, we love each other. And we had then a more, I think, defined goal of just showing these people who are loving and wonderful people that, God provided a way for them to approach him. And it was not through the 5 pillars, it was actually through the book. So sorry, that was a long way to answer your question, but
that was great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
I want to go back to one of the points just because I'm reading your book and really enjoy it. By the way, we haven't mentioned it yet, but Emily is an author, and the title of the book is We Died Before We Came Here. So highly recommend it. But you talk about some of the unique delicacies of the area. So would you mind sharing, as people are welcoming you in and into a different context, what are some of the more unique foods that you experience? But I thought it was even more impressive that your kids just dove right in and just embraced the culture.
I'm glad you asked that, because one of my favorite things to do is to encourage people that God created kids with a resilience, and it's a natural resilience, and they don't have all of their walls built up of preferences and what they can handle and what they can't handle. For my kids, again, they were 9, almost 10 and under. My youngest was 10 months old when we went. And Stephen and I struggled right away. I mean, obviously with the food, we're leaving what's familiar. My kids are too, they like peanut butter jelly sandwiches. My goodness, they turn their nose up to broccoli like any other kid. But when we got there, it's amazing what a little hunger can make you sort of compromise. And I think because they didn't have those options, they just kind of went with the flow. So, we're struggling. And to be honest, I mean, he tried. He made it psychological. He went in, he would drink this special milk that they serve whenever they're serving hospitality. I never liked it. I still don't. And it actually makes me feel nauseous every time I talk about it. But he just went for it. So he was like, I'm going to make myself love and adapt to this culture, food and all. And he did in the first year. So, I had to teach my kids, when you're given that bowl of milk, which everything's community, everybody drinks out of the same bowl, the milk out of the same bowl, everybody drinks the same cup of tea, it gets refilled and it gets passed around some more. So they share everything, germs and all. And so I could have really got caught up in that and stressed about that. But I felt like the Lord said, I'm a lot more concerned about your kids than you are. Just love these people. And so we did it. However, the milk, I just couldn't do that. So I taught my kids, which is where actually a lot of the parasites were. So I taught them the got milk commercial. I had them lift the bowl to have a little milk mustache, and then they could just pass it on and say, "Oh, that's so good. Thank you." But as far as the food, at first they were a little picky. But it didn't take them long to realize, I have all these kids to play with, and I have to sit here and eat. All these kids are eating this, so I must have to eat it too. And so they would just take a big handful out of a common platter. We taught them, you just eat what's in front of you. You don't go reaching across the platter, and they did that, and they adapted so well, sometimes they didn't, I would just make them eat a little, they would go, but sometimes they were just so hungry, especially if I wasn't starving them, obviously, but we would go into the interior and picnic, for example, on our way to an oasis. And all we have is the head of the goat left that our family we were visiting had sacrificed for our family. If you think about that for a moment, that's a whole animal. And that is really an honor that they would sacrifice that animal to feed your family while you're visiting them. And so the delicacy obviously is the head of the goat or the sheep, and the eyeballs especially. So I don't know how gory you wanted to get with this, but my kids never went that far, but they dug into that goat head and they would eat so they could go play on the sand dunes or so they could go play with the kids, and they were never complaining about it, and so I wouldn't say never, but they eventually learned that there was no point in complaining about it. They would just take what they enjoy life with local children. So yes, the grace of the Lord reaches and spans even the local foods of where God sends us. So
I love it. I've got 2 young kids, and I was just sitting there thinking of how they would respond in that context. But like you said, you just kind of embrace the scene and the kids and everybody's playing, and so who knows, that I just thought that was a fun story. Yeah. So thanks for sharing. But
no problem.
As a whole, can you share the story of your family's time? So you went for five weeks before, came back. Both you and your husband felt called to go back to this place. You're stateside for 2 years in preparation, and then you head back to that country. And can you share the story of what happens next?
Yeah, so when we prepared to go back long term, it was a little bit different because, again, we had what we were basing our perspective on and our planning on was what we had already experienced, which honestly was not entirely accurate because we were on a large team. We didn't get to actually get to know and communicate and just sit in homes with local people and drink tea and actually get to know them as family units or as individuals. We got to serve. We served in the prison. We, rebuilt a home for a single mom with 7 kids, who was living in a shack. We did all these wonderful projects, but we had not yet really integrated into a relational level with the people. So we didn't fully understand the depth of relationship that was possible in our 5 weeks there. I think we were a unique case. Of course, we were a family with 3 children. It's difficult to sort of plug people in like that. Not saying that this is every short-term experience. It's not by any means, but it just happened to be our experience. So when we go back long term, we're thinking, okay, we don't really know these people very well. You know, we know the climate is challenging. We know the food is challenging. We know, all these things we're anticipating were a lot of negatives, I would say. I'm going to have to help my kids adapt to this and adapt to that. And I'm just really hypersensitive to how my kids are dealing with this, I would say, probably more so than myself. So I went in with a lot of tension, headaches, and, just trying to shelter and help my kids adapt and try to take care of this home in a foreign environment where there is no Walmart, there is no grocery store chain necessarily. It was really a lot of getting used to initially. So eventually though, we realized, again, like I said before, we found our home, we moved into this community, and the community totally stepped up and wrapped us up in hospitality. And that very easily and quickly gave us a real taste of the people, the culture we're about to engage. And yeah, there were different things, obviously. I mean, in our culture, we don't finish the food we have to finish the food on our plate, because if we don't, then it's not being respectful and grateful, and you don't want to waste food. Well, in that culture, hospitality is such a deep value that your hostess will probably feel really shamed that she didn't provide adequate hospitality if you finish everything on your plate. She'll think she didn't have enough to serve you. So we learned, you really don't have to stuff yourself to where you're just can't even move and you're sick for days. You really just need to appreciate hospitality, and it's okay to leave a little bit on the platter. Little things like that we learned along the way. But I think what we learned most, which most helped our efforts in developing a relationship that was conducive to sharing the gospel, was just hospitality. It was literally just drinking tea with these people. And they were so adamant about you being comfortable in their home that, we would relax. They would insist, obviously, that in this culture, especially being a nomadic culture historically, they didn't have a lot of real furniture as we would consider real furniture. They didn't have couches and chairs and that kind of thing. We ate on the floor. There was the little tablecloth underneath the big platter we're all sharing. And then there may be like little thin mattresses lining the walls on a carpet where people can just relax and sit and visit. So for them, the real decorations of their home are the people who frequented their homes. That's such a foreign concept to us in the West. We have this concept of our home has to be perfect. We have to have just the right decorations, just the right pictures on the wall. Everything has to be served so nice and neatly. For them, their value was literally just focused on the people that were there and serving those people. They hardly had anything on their walls, because that's not the decoration. It was the people. And so it was just neat to eventually learn and adapt to their hospitality culture, where we could go in and literally we would eat, even if we didn't finish the platter, would eat more than we could possibly really eat, and then just feel like we're going to pass out. And if you actually fall asleep in their homes, then they feel so honored because they have produced the type of hospitality that made you so comfortable that you could fall asleep. And then they're super honored. That is so countercultural for us in the West, but that is the culture we encountered. And that was where, just over that cup of tea, 2-3 cups of tea in a visit, was where the atmosphere was just so aligned for meaningful conversation. And they're just very personal people. So conversation was not hard to start up and not hard to maintain to where it would lead to a spiritual conversation.
So your time over there was cut shorter than anticipated. So I know that's the major part of the book and your journey since then, but can you tell us maybe what happened leading up to Stephen being killed, and then maybe some of the things surrounding that.
Yeah, so we, of course, the world was aware of Muslim extremists and causing problems and targeting, certain people. But in the time we first moved there, that was mostly localized in Central Asia, Afghanistan, those areas, Iraq eventually. But they started infiltrating North Africa because much of North Africa is Muslim. They set up camps there in the country neighboring the country where we lived, and they were running their campaigns. They were going into countries like ours, which was very, very underdeveloped, very poor. And, our country's military was very weak. There was not a whole lot of established security along the borders. So they easily infiltrated our country into really remote desert areas where people barely had access to anything global. So they were living in a very small world in their little tiny communities. The one thing is the way that Allah, has, Allah is the one they serve. And so they would come in and recruit these naive men, sometimes boys, barely older than 14, 15 years old, and convince them and their families that, if they come and they serve, if they can come, they'll freely train them to follow Allah to the end. So, of course, what that end is Jihad. The families who already have such a respect for Allah, that for them, they're thinking, we're in the middle of nowhere. This might be the opportunity my child needs. So they're willing to let them go. So, yeah, they had recruited 3 young men from the interior of our country and trained them. And by the time they were 21, 22, this was about 5 or 6 years into our time in North Africa, they started wreaking havoc in our country, and especially targeting Westerners. And so there were some French tourists who were kidnapped, killed. There were just some things going on that was making our country, and then expats especially living in our country, very nervous and very feeling very insecure, because obviously, again, it's a third world country. They don't have a lot of means like we have means to protect our country. So people started leaving. There was quite an exodus of Westerners, whether they were working for Christian organizations or whether they were working for, secular organizations. And yeah, we found ourselves in a position where we were asking the Lord, okay, now you called us here. Now this sort of situation that is causing a lot of unrest obviously applies to us too. What do you want us to do? And so we prayed. And Stephen was already, I don't know, but it just seems like just at that moment was the moment we were really starting to sense that we were gaining a lot of fruit in our ministry. We were in this restricted country. We can't even be there as missionaries, so we weren't identified as missionaries. We actually were running a non-governmental organization that was doing relief and development, humanitarian work, and very appreciated by the people and the government. So Stephen became very well known because he was a man of integrity. He was the one of all the Westerners that would not pay a bribe just to make life easier for us. It was that kind of thing. So he became very well known, but in a positive light, except for the Muslim extremists who saw him as a threat, because everyone knew he was a Christian. He's obvious. I mean, they assume every American, every European even, is a Christian or a Catholic, and they actually equate the two. It's kind of a very messed up perception that a lot of Muslims have of Westerners. And so we were all targets, whether we were Christian or not, to be honest. And so, but Stephen obviously was a Christian. People understood this was a man who knew the book, which was the Bible, people were coming to him and asking questions, asking if he had Arabic Bibles, just asking questions. Even an imam from across the street of our training center was asking him questions. He wanted to study. It's like, I know Jesus was a good prophet, but I don't know what he taught or what the miracles were. So all that to say, we were having a lot of fruit popping up all of a sudden. It felt like, man, we've been working all these years to get some momentum for the gospel, and seems like it's coming. And then all of a sudden, Al-Qaeda comes in, extremists come in, and they start, causing all these problems. And then Westerners start leaving, other missionaries were leaving, and we felt very isolated, to be honest, because there were people leaving. We weren't the only ones that stayed, don't get me wrong, but I would say a good portion of the few missionaries that were working in this country, they left. Either they were pulled out by the organization, or they just felt like now's a good time to take a sabbatical or a furlough. And we prayed, and we did not feel a peace about leaving. Those people we were discipling and other people were discipling were coming to us. Okay, my mentor is leaving. Are you leaving too? We need to be discipled. And we just really did not feel a peace about leaving. So we prayed together again and asked the Lord for strength and obviously protection. We did not look for or strive for the worst case scenario, obviously, but we realized that it was a very real possibility. So all that to say, Stephen was trying to go about his business, working. We were discipling people, and but we tried to be wise, obviously, in how we did things. We didn't want to be just a sitting duck per se. We tried to be very cautious in what we did, but at the same time trying to fulfill what we felt like we were called there to do. And Stephen started telling, we started praying and talking, our team, and even with our own children, he would tell us, life is short. Life is a vapor. We need to work while it's day, and encourage us to be courageous. So eventually he was very clearly targeted by 3 young Qaeda men. They were locals, but didn't know who he was from anybody. It took them a while actually to figure out who he was and where he was, and they followed him. And we learned later probably sat outside our home for a few days. And they targeted him one morning when he was arriving at our training center, and tried to kidnap him, but it was an unsuccessful attempt. When they realized they weren't being successful in that, one pulled out a pistol, which I'm sure Stephen didn't know was there, and he was shot blank there on the streets just in front of our training center. And those 3 men were in the car and taking off immediately. But I know that before they were very far, I know that Stephen was standing before the Lord, and I can picture Jesus standing at the right hand of the Father, just like Stephen in the Bible when he saw him. And I believe Stephen was welcomed with, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." So yes, we were there 7 years. It was an abrupt ending, not one that we were taken by surprise, but one that we knew was a possibility. And the first thing that came to my mind when I heard the news was, God, you have to be glorified. Because I know that Stephen knew that you were worthy, and Stephen was willing, but please tell me you were glorified in this. And I think that was probably the first and only since almost audible voice I heard from the Lord, who said, "I am glorified today." And I think that was a gift to me and my family, because we realized at that point, he is worthy, and it was not for nothing. And of course we ask many whys in life with tragedy, but we have no doubt that Stephen gave his life for the Lord willingly, and that the Lord has clearly done amazing things in spite of that, or through that, I would say.
Yeah, man, I super encouraged, I guess, by your faith, your faithfulness, and the decisions you made out of faith. And I can't imagine just that tragic loss that you guys felt. But what did God teach you and your family out of the loss of your husband?
That's a great question. I'm glad, because he taught us, I would say that the most vivid lesson we learned through that experience was that what we already understood theoretically about God and about his word became real. And I'll have to explain that. So these theoretical truths sort of became these solid, irrefutable truths. These truths that he's worthy. These truths that there is peace that surpasses all understanding, and it will guard our hearts if we embrace it. That was real to us. We had heard that promise. We had read that in the Word. We had encouraged each other with that. But it became tangible after my husband's death. And not just for me, for my children too. And that was Philippians 4:7. We all know that verse. But also, it made sense that, life is a vapor. We read that in James 4:14. Life is a vapor. We don't know our days. I mean, David in the Old Testament says, number my days, show me, how short life is. Why? Because we only have a short amount of time to make the most of it, right? And that was something that Stephen lived daily. But I think that became more real to me and to my children after our experience of losing Stephen. Life is a vapor. And that also, I think, is confirmed, or it makes more sense when Jesus says in John 9:4, we have to work while it is day. Because there will be night that's coming that no man can work. So work while you have an opportunity to work. That was really the theme of Stephen's life when we were working there. He wasted no time. Yes, he took his moments to enjoy his children. We would sit, we had our family nights that we incorporated so that we tried to balance family and ministry. And he genuinely enjoyed that. He played baseball with my son. He would take the girls on bike rides. He would play dolls with the girls in their room, sometimes. And we would play games or watch Andy Griffith. We did that till we watched every season of Andy Griffith. We were thankful for those DVDs. And it was just these moments that the Lord gave us, these downtimes, but he never, ever lost sight. Didn't seem like, at least from my perspective, he did not ever lose sight of the meaning of life and the concept of not wasting it, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so he would say those things like, well, we have to work while it's day. We have to work while we can. Life is a vapor. And I think the other really important thing that I think God taught me personally through this, and I think especially I've seen it very much become real in my oldest daughter's life, and it's still developing in my younger kids, and that is the concept of identifying with Jesus. When people experience tragedy or trauma, especially unusual things like this, there's this element of comfort we sort of gain by finding someone who's been through the same thing. People can give their very kind sentiments, their very kind condolences, but unless they've experienced it, it's just words. They're important ones and they are comforting, but there's nothing like the depth of comfort we can get from just knowing someone else survived what I just went through. And not only did they survive, they came out better, or they just are stronger people for it. And God really is faithful. He took care of them even in that. And obviously in my own life, I can easily look at Elizabeth Elliot, and the other wives that were part of that tragedy. And I can say, okay, they survived it, I can survive this too. And that to me was really profound. And I think for my children, they've had less interaction with children who have lost fathers to this kind of death. But when they do, it's like suddenly they move from this foreign culture into a culture where they speak. That makes sense? And so I say this because ultimately we have people who have experienced something similar to what we've experienced. But what really, really profoundly impacted me almost immediately was this idea that I could identify with Christ. You know, I mean, we read in 1 Peter 4 where, Peter says, "Do not be surprised at the fiery trial, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice to the degree that you share in Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed." And I feel like I actually identified to some small degree Christ's sufferings and what I went through. And this was a choice. I obviously could have just allowed this situation to make me bitter and just throw in the towel of ministry and missions and think, oh, it was not worth it. But I couldn't do that because I knew enough, I think, and I don't know enough still to this day. We're all growing, right? But I knew enough at that point about the nature and character of God, my Father in heaven, that I could not turn from that, and that I could actually look at the life of Jesus and think, wow, I think I have a tiny little taste of the suffering that he endured, but at the same time, this paradoxical joy of serving the Lord and experiencing his faithfulness and this peace that surpasses all understanding and the fruit. So I have had the joy of going back. We still go back every year, a couple times a year at least. We spend as much time as we can in North Africa, and we see the fruit. We see the fruit. The enemy did not win. This was not an ultimate failure or an ultimate loss, because God is so much bigger than that. And yeah, he's always up to so much more than we can fathom or understand. So yeah.
That's really encouraging. Thank you. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, it's a powerful story. And again, for those interested, the book We Died Before We Came Here goes a lot deeper into the story. Highly recommend it. But as we wrap up today, what resources or next steps might you recommend for people who'd like to reach out to Muslims at home or maybe abroad?
Yeah, one of the biggest lessons we learned in effective ministry, we learned from the people we ministered to. And the more we understood the concept, the more we actually saw it come alive even in Scripture. It's funny, you can just read something and totally overlook a really important concept. And I've already mentioned this before, but what we learned from them is a concept lost touch with here in the West, by and large, and that is the concept of hospitality. This is where our ministry became effective. This was where we have. This is where we actually were able to lay aside all these strategies and concepts in our mind of how you're supposed to steer a conversation or how you're supposed to, use this method or that method to get the result. It's not necessarily a formula. If there is a formula, been given the formula in Scripture, because God in his sovereignty put this plan of hospitality in motion from the fall of man. We were alienated from the beginning. What he put into motion after that was making a way so that he could welcome us back in. We're no longer strangers. We're actually being back in. That is ultimate hospitality. So when you look at the New Testament and you look at what Jesus did, 70% or more of the parables and stories in the book of Luke has to do with food and drink. If you don't believe me, just look again, read the book of Luke and just see how many times food or eating or drinking comes up. His first miracle, right, was about a drink. And not I'm not emphasizing alcohol means, but what I'm saying is, like, God created us with this need, this very innate need to eat and drink, not just so that we could be gluttons, but he actually gave us this need so that we could fellowship and so that we can reach other people. And I think most of us can agree the most meaningful conversations we've ever had has never been over a phone line. It's never been over, a meeting or a conference table. It's been over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea or a scone or, a Chick-fil-A biscuit or whatever. These are where I think the Spirit has the freedom to move. There's something about our anatomy that just sort of relaxes when we have a cup of something warm in our hand, or even iced tea. I'm from the South. I hate sweet tea, but I can use that as a concept. If I want to reach my neighbor here in the Southeast, I can serve them some sweet tea and I can get some sweet conversation out of it, because that is how God created us to be. So we learned that, I would say, from our people that we were ministering to in North Africa. And I use it there, and it's very effective. And I use it here. So, long story short, the Lord did give me the opportunity to remarry a man who lost his wife in ministry as well. We're a blended family. We're quite a large family now. But his passion and his work is reaching the unreached who live among us. And we all know, no matter your political position on immigration, they're here, whether you like it or not, whether we like it or not. And if we can stop looking at it as a political and economical issue and start looking at it from a spiritual lens, then I believe God will open our eyes to this amazing, beautiful ministry he served us on a silver platter. And I'm telling you, the same concept works. We just provide hospitality, and we have this honor of being the host in the United States. We have that honor. And if we close our doors, make sure our ADT sign is bright and shiny right over our welcome mat, the irony, then we're going to be closing out this amazing opportunity. And so they really, really, really want to be welcomed, but they're not going to impose on us. We're the guests. We're the host. We're the host. They're the guests. So for them, it would be dishonoring to try and approach us first. So let's step up and be the hospitable people that the Lord has called us to be, and see the opportunities just multiply for the gospel to take root in natural conversations over a cup of tea. It doesn't matter what our home looks like. Martha Stewart is not the biblical standard of hospitality. If your house is messy, you're probably going to have guests coming with children that feel a lot more at ease. And I can't keep everything totally clean, but at the end of the day, that's not what matters. And so, yes, the Lord has given us so much. And yes, there are so many resources out there, so many books, so many training programs, which are wonderful. So I'm not discrediting or minimizing any of that, but I'm saying that no matter who you are, where you're from, if you live in a home, which most of us do, and if you eat and drink, which most of us do, if we can invite the world into our lives to share that with, we will find that the door will absolutely open to the gospel, and God will reach the unreached here and abroad, and even reach our own native people through hospitality.
That's awesome. Good tips. Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining us today. We've been really encouraged by your powerful testimony and your family's journey, and the ongoing work that you continue to do in North Africa. Be praying for Emily if you're listening. And if you want to hear more about her story, we'll put a link in the description for her book. But thank you again, Emily. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of Mission Minded. For more information on today's topic and show notes, please visit our website, itechusa.org. Mission Minded Podcast is produced by iTech. The goal of this podcast is to inspire conversations about Great Commission participation. The views, organizations, and individuals represented, interviewed, and discussed on the podcast do not necessarily represent an official position or formal partnerships with iTech.